I think when you lose one sense, your other senses are heightened, right? And so, listen, I've fallen off stages before, and so I'm prepared. Tell me if I'm getting close to the edge, because I'm like right there, figuring it out. Hey, welcome to Be Hope Church. This is so great. I hope you're having as much fun as I am, because this is all kinds of fun right now. This is called an Oculus, in case you don't know. Anybody know? Okay, a couple people do. This is called an Oculus, and what it does is it's this virtual reality thing, and you put it on, and you step into another world. But before you can do that, you have to set the parameters. And so you have to set the parameters of the room, and you have these little controller things, and you put them out, and then you have to like here's the ground, so that they know the ground. And when you calibrate the Oculus, then it sets it into motion of what you're going to do. Ooh, I felt something. I'm like, ooh, I'm wrong. Anyway, you set this all into motion, and then you know. And so, oh, I'm not too bad. That's pretty good. And so once you set that into motion, and then you have the parameters. And so we were going to try to set it up so that you guys could see exactly what I see at the same time. It would have been a real hoot. But I did it this week, and I had set the parameters, and I walked on this plank on this really high skyscraper, and then fell off, and it was terrible. But let me show you what happened. Here, Keisha. It's going to show you. They're going to pull up the video. Oh, there I am. See? Because I ran into the chairs because they were setting my stuff, and I had just fallen. And so I don't know where I am, and Matt's trying to help me get back into place because we had set these parameters up, and I was going outside the bounds. And you can't see because you live in this whole other world. Do you know that somewhere in the world they are setting up VR churches where you wear this Oculus, and then you can meet other people? When we were in there, this is the first time, obviously, I've done that. Like, I don't know where I've been all my life, but I haven't. And they were telling me that I was talking to Matt. They belong to Matt Scruggs. And I was asking him, I said, so do you play games, or are these for your kids and your kids use them? And he's like, actually, they're not really good for kids because of the ocular, hence the name, because of the eye and brain development and how old they are and stuff like that. And I said, oh, so this is your toy? And he was like, yeah, it kind of is. And so then he was saying, I was like, well, what do you do? Like, you can only walk a plank so many times. And he was like, well, I play ping pong. And I was like, with who? Like, is it just, he goes, well, just people sign up online. And I'm like, what? Like, you just play randomly? And there's Noah, one of our interns this summer was here. And Noah's like, yeah, is that weird to you? And I'm like, all kinds of weird. Is it not weird to you? And he's like, no, it's like normal. And I was like, what? Again, I was in a virtual world when I wasn't even in the Oculus. We did all of that. I set all those parameters. So you would know that we're talking about a brand new thing today called calibrate. And I had to calibrate my place where I was sitting, and I had to be in this place, and I had to set it up so that I could go forward. So we start this brand new series today called Calibrate. And because there are things in our life that need to be calibrated, we need to recalibrate them. Have you ever been driving down the road and all of a sudden, like, you're shimmying in your car and you're like, whoa, something is off? Have that feeling? You ever start to do something and then, like, it's not right and you're like, oh, wait, something is not right here. I have 3 digital clocks in my kitchen. You do too. Your microwave, the stove. And then we have this... what you talk to it? Alexa or Siri. I think it's Alexa. I don't know. The kids know the name. I don't. I was going to name it something. Anyway, sidetrack. Let me get focused here. Anyway, I have these 3 different clocks, and they're not ever set on the same thing because one of them, for something, will go wrong. Or if the electricity blinks for a minute, my stove all of a sudden goes out, and I'm like, oh, we're not set. I have to recalibrate. I have to put them back. And so in order to calibrate something, or in order to recalibrate something, there has to be a standard. There has to be, what am I setting it to? You understand this, right? There has to be something that I'm like, oh, like when your car begins to shimmy and you take it to the mechanic, he's like, oh, let me set it on this tool. Oh, your wheels are misaligned. We can figure this out. We set that and we reset it. And so, of course, Alexa always knows the perfect time, so I have to reset to her every time if something else goes wrong. And I found out that this week, that there is actually this National Institute of Standards and Technology, used to be just standards, and it's this big thing. Like, it's a big deal. It's a part of the government. I know you're not as impressed with this than I am, but I did not know that there were these things that set standards. There's this whole government, piece of the government, that sets standards. Like, so much so that when you buy a screw that you're going to make a new bookcase in and you put it in a certain way, that the standards are set to how many rotations there are. There are people that figure that out. I just thought it happened happenstance, but it doesn't. I talked to some of my friends last night who are in the scientific world more so than I am, and they're like, yes, they set everything. The atomic clock. That's why Alexis always knows what time it is, because she's set to the standard that has been pointed out. And so there are these standards that are always set out, and so that when something goes wrong, you can set up to it. You can calibrate to the standard that is set. You know, our bodies were created that same way. Our bodies were created to have this thing within us that has to reset. You know, when you get that pain and you're like, oh, what is that? Oh, I ate the wrong thing last night. Your body recalibrates, right? It sets it up. Or you're cranky and tired all the time. You're like, well, no wonder I haven't slept in 3 nights. Oh, your body needs to recalibrate and to set back up. We get these little warning signs within us. We get these little warning signs of the things that need to be recalibrated, and we have to set them up to the standard. Have you ever had your heart not calibrated right? Or your soul uncalibrated? Sometimes we don't look at that very often. We don't look into what that is, and we don't think, oh, I need to recalibrate my heart. Until something happens and someone brings it up, and then you're like, shoot. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about calibrating and recalibrating to where we need to and what it is, and setting up the standard. And that we're going to find out today that God set up the standard. We're going to read in the book of Amos in just a couple of minutes. Now, Amos is this incredible book in the Old Testament, and Amos was a prophet. And so prophets were people who heard from God and then told the people what God had said. Because in those days, God spoke through his prophets. And so what's really interesting is prophets were always from the line of priests. And so a priest was usually a prophet. He heard from God and he told the people. And then his son would have been a prophet because he heard. And it was usually, you follow your father's occupation. And it was usually set up that way, and you would set into that. And so Amos is no different. And so, actually, Amos is very different. Amos is a shepherd. Now, Amos is this shepherd who's out in the field. He was not a priest. He was not from the priestly line. He was not any of that. He's a shepherd. And so a shepherd, we know the definition of shepherd. It's somebody who watches sheep, who would be out there with the sheep, and they would be out there all day. Shepherds were usually not considered high class in any part of society because they were always outside. They were always dirty. They were usually muddy, and they just took care of the sheep. And so they weren't thought of very greatly and stuff. And so here Amos is outside all the time, and he gets this vision from God. And so here's how my mind goes. Here's how I envision it, is that Amos gets this vision from God, and he has to do something with it. My understanding is that Amos, who's with the sheep all the time, and probably not very many other shepherds, they didn't have like a shepherd convention, or they didn't have like, hey, once a month we're going to gather to a shepherd that's going to be good for us. We're going to talk about sheep. They didn't do those kinds of things. So he's mostly out there by himself. So I would be talking to the sheep. I would be like, John. I would name them real names because then they would feel like people to me. I'd be like, John, stop. You're not supposed to be in that pen. Get over here. He probably had those conversations. But in this moment, when we know that God gives Amos a vision, that when Amos is out in the field, he's talking to God. You see, Amos has this relationship with God because we understand that Amos gets this vision from God, and then he goes and tells the people, and Amos becomes a prophet. He's not supposed to be because he's a shepherd. That's where you're supposed to stay. But he's in his everyday life, and he hears from God. Do you know God still speaks today? Do you know that God still talks to us today? Maybe you need to get out in the field and do some sheep for a little while. Maybe that's where you're going to hear from God. Maybe you just need to be in your everyday life doing your job and be open to what God has to say. You see, this is where it goes different, because way too often they thought that God only spoke to the prophets. God only spoke to the priests. God only spoke. And then Amos comes and breaks the mold. And he's like, oh, wait, I'm a shepherd and I have this vision from God. I have something and God wants me to share it. You have that too. You have that same opportunity. God wants to speak to you and tell you something. God wants to be able to step into your life and tell you something. And maybe he's going to tell you something that you need to tell the whole world, like Amos. Maybe not. But let's look and see what Amos had to say. In Amos chapter 7, here's what's happening. And so he's been talking to God and listening to him, and God gives him this vision. And so he doesn't give him a good vision. It's not like he says, Amos, I want you to go tell everybody that life is going to be good and they're going to, it's going to rain enough. You're going to have all the great crops. It's going to be good. He doesn't give him that vision. God gives him a vision of destruction. And so God gives Amos this vision. See, Amos is part of the Israelites. And the Israelites were the people who we often call God's chosen people. You'll hear them in the Bible as the ones that God chose. And God chose them to share his message throughout the world. And so the Israelites were the ones who had been in slavery, and they had been led out of slavery, and God spent time with them, and they wandered in the wilderness, and they got to know who God was, and they set this up. And so they're living in the land around all the people, and everybody knew that the Israelites, they knew their story, they knew what had happened to them, and so they knew that they were God's people. And as they were establishing in the land and setting up, I always think of Old Testament similar to Game of Thrones. Have you ever connected that? Because there's all these battles for land, and there's good. Okay, maybe not that visual, but it's like you can see that. But anyway, so here's Amos. And these people are coming against God's chosen people. And God gives Amos this vision, and he says, hey, you need to tell those people that are coming against my people that they're in for destruction. Like, it's not going to be good. They cannot come against my people. And so I'm sure Amos goes out and he begins to tell, and then all the Israelites, all of God's people are like, yeah, go get him, Amos. We're for you. You can step in and be a prophet because we love what you're saying. It's so great. Destroy them. They're coming against us. They're so mean. Get them. Those are the easy ones, right? But then God also has a vision for the Israelites. God gives Amos this vision for his people because they haven't been listening, because they haven't been following God's direction, because they haven't been going in the place where they needed to go. Like, they had turned from God, and they were listening to other things, and they were following other directions, and they were trying to live in the land and blend into the land and be like, oh, you have multiple gods? All right, we'll get multiple blessings if we listen to multiple gods, no problem. And God had told them something different from the beginning. And so in this chapter that we're going to read, Amos gives the vision for the people, and this is what he's telling them. So in Amos chapter 7, verse 1, it says this. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested and after the late crops were coming up. When they had stripped the land clean, I cried out, oh, sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob, when he says Jacob there, he means the land of Israel, all of the people. How can Jacob survive? He is so small. So the Lord relented. So here's what he's saying. Here's the first vision that he gives for the people. He's like, hey, your crops are going to be big and they're going to be great. And then you have to pay your taxes to the king to the government, to whoever you pay your taxes, you're going to pay your taxes. And then after that, and then the late harvest, like when it's really good and ready, God's going to send locusts and going to destroy all of it. You will have no food. You will have no trade. You will not be able to make anything. And Amos is like, oh, no, God, no, that is too much. That's too much. That's too harsh on them. God, don't. And God relents. And so then he gives them this next one. So then, in verse 4, this is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. He dried it up, the great deep, and devoured the land. And then I cried out, sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He is so small. So the Lord relented. This will not happen either, the sovereign Lord said. And so here we go. There's this next vision, and Amos is like, oh, God. God says, I'm going to send fire. It's going to dry up all the water source. It's going to take everything that's left. It's going to, listen, they are so far gone. I got to do this to get their attention. And Amos is like, no, God. Oh, God, nope, please. It's too much. They can't. Like you will take everything away from them. And the Lord relented. You know what I love about this little section right here? This is a side note. But this is what I love, is that Amos has relationship with God. Amos has this piece where he is in conversation with God. You see, Amos, we established earlier that Amos talked to God, that Amos had some kind of relationship with God because God sent him a vision. And Amos listened and obeyed and took this vision out. And he's like, he didn't stand back and go, no, I'm just a shepherd. I can't do that. God's like, no, I need you to prophesy this. And so then here's this place where Amos has this obvious relationship with God. That God tells him, hey, here's what's going to happen. And Amos is like, oh, God, that's too much. That can't happen. He's like, God, that is going to be a lot. You see, Amos loved the people. Amos was one of the people. That was Amos. And he was like, God, they can't handle that. I love that there's this relational aspect of this. That we can see that God is not just this man upstairs who says, oh, that, and you got to listen and we're done. No. You can have a relationship with God. You can talk back to God. You can say the things to God that you need to. I love that because there's a lot of times I'm like, God, are you kidding me? How is this? What? How can, what? Oh. Anybody ever get to that place where things are happening in your life and you're like, God, this is too much. How can we keep doing this? What is it that you're trying to show me? How do I need to? And see, this is what we talk about prayer all the time. We talk about prayer as this conversation. We talk about prayer as this thing where you can talk to God and you can listen to God. And Amos gives us this incredible example of that, where you can say, God, I don't understand. God, I don't know how that is going. And God, that seems to be too much. Can you step in there? God, can you help in this? Can you show me why? God, can you give me a little sign of your peace? Because I don't see any of it right now. You can have that conversation with God. You can have that conversation. You can pray. You can talk to God. And then you can leave space for listening to God. Because I'm going to tell you, God will still respond to you today. God will answer your prayers. God wants to have conversation with you and talk with you. You have to be listening. You have to open. And I know as soon as it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, that sounds so weird. How do we listen to God? Like, telephone line. God, dial me up. Do you know, side note, I have to say this or else I won't be able to focus. Do you know they used to have these things where you could dial in and you could get a text from God every day? Isn't that fun? Like you could dial this number and God would send you a text and it would be signed God. It was just a Bible verse, so it wasn't real. But just so that you know, you could have. Wouldn't that be easy? Wouldn't that be easy if you could text your prayer to God and like he would respond and you'd be like, got it, know what to do now. Great. Wouldn't that be good? But God has this incredible way of softening your heart. God has this incredible way when we begin to pray, when we begin to open ourselves up, when we begin to say, oh, God, can you show me? Then he does. But we have to be opening to listening. This is what I love about Amos so far, because he didn't stop. When God gave him that vision, he didn't go, no, I'm not a prophet, I can't be telling anybody that kind of stuff. And he didn't say, ooh, God, yeah, I'm not telling them that because that's mean and they're still not going to like me. I don't want that. He didn't. He listened to God and he said the things. And then he conversed with God and he said, God, oh, that's too much. They can't do that, God. You can't destroy them like that. He loved the people. And he said, God, is there something else? And this is what God says. I love this piece. So far, I love it all. Can you tell? I just love it. This is what happens. So in verse 7, so when the Lord said this will not happen, verse 7, this is what he showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to plumb, with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord asked me, what do you see, Amos? A plumb line, I replied. And the Lord said, look, I am setting a plumb line among my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. God says, hey, I'm going to set up this plumb line. I'm going to set a standard so that you will know the standard. Do you guys know what a plumb line is? Well, it starts with a plumb bob. Hey, Bob. Everybody say hi, Bob. This is Bob. This is a plumb bob. And it's attached to a line, hence the word plumb line, right? And here's what happens, is you hang it, and then it shows you a straight line. Side note, let me tell you this. This is the coolest thing. I figured this out this week. It just struck me. The book of the Old Testament, Amos, talks about a plumb line. I went to Barney's Hardware in Beaver Creek and I bought a plumb line. Can we not shout out that the Bible is relevant right there? It's a plumb line from Amos. Thank you very much. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Apparently I had a lot of coffee this morning. I'm real excited about all of this. You will be too, as soon as I explain it to you. All right, so this is what happens. This plumb line is used in construction. And so what it does is when it weighs down, it gives you a straight line. And so when you're building a house and you're building something or building a wall and you have a header up here with your two sides, then what you do is you put that plumb bob there and then you can know exactly where the footer needs to go so that it's exactly in a straight line, so that your wall is strong, so that your wall is straight, so that then all the other walls become straight. Or if you're going to hang wallpaper, you can put a plumb line up and then you can have a straight line and then you can know where it's going to go. And so I understand that we now in construction have lasers and we have all these really cool fancy tools, but do you know that in construction they still use a plumb bob? They still use this as a weight and as a measurement. I was watching, I have to tell you this too. In my life, I've only had 3 jobs ever. I've been a pastor, I was a teacher, and I worked at a lumber company for a long time. So I was like, I know lumber. Of course, it's been way too many years and I forget everything, but I remembered plumb bob and I knew what that was. And so I watched a YouTube video to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, just to brush up on all my knowledge. And then he's talking about what it does and how it is and all that kind of stuff. And then he says this phrase that resonated so deeply with me because I'm reading scripture about a plumb bob. And he says, do not mistake the simplicity of this tool for the precision that it is. And I was like, oh, do not mistake the simplicity of this tool for the precision that it is. And you see, God said, hey, I'm going to be the plumb line. I'm going to be the standard that is set. And he said to all of Israel, he goes, I'm going to be the standard that is set, and you will know where the straight line is. You will know how to measure up. You will know how to get to this place. You will know when you're off. You will know when you need to calibrate because I'm going to set the standard. And that way we'll have this measuring stick. But what happens is we tend to think, oh, if that's the measuring stick, if I go right to here, then I don't measure up. I'm not going to make it. God doesn't love me. Or you tend to think like, oh, here's a line. What? You crossed the line? Out. Sorry, not in. But that's not ever what God intended. That's not ever what God said that the standard would be. He said, my standard will be this way of life that I'm showing you. My standard will be my will and my way. You see, at the very beginning, when the Israelites were first coming out of Egypt, they had multiple gods, and they prayed to multiple gods so that they could get multiple blessings. And God said, hey, I'm going to show you my way. And so in that, he gives them these 10 commandments. We call them 10 commandments. People say 10 rules. It's just not that simple. It's not a commandment that's like, this is it, you're in, you're out, you're up. God said, let me show you a way of life. And so he told them these 10 things to set the standard. Don't have any other gods before me. I am the one and only true God. Simple. He said, don't have any idols. You will worship me. You don't have to have any idols. Don't misuse the name of the Lord. Don't swear by my name. My name is holy. Keep it holy. He said, remember the Sabbath day. Remember that there's a Sabbath. And they said, honor your father and mother. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't covet. And you see, we say all these things, and God always intended relationship from them. God always said, hey, when you can remember these, when you can live into these, you are going to have the best life. God always intended good for us. That's why he relented when Amos is like, oh God, that's too much. It's too much. God always intends good for you. You see, Jesus said the same things when Jesus came in the New Testament, and they had lost sight of who God was. And the people had lost sight, and they hadn't heard from God. And God sent his son because that was his plan all along, to send his son. And Jesus came into the world, and that's where we read everything in the New Testament. And Jesus said the same things, just in a different way. Jesus said things like, Jesus said, worship God and God alone. He said, no one can serve two masters. He said, don't swear on an oath other than God. He said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And he said, anybody who loves his mother and father more than me is going to have problems. Honor your father and mother. And then he said, anyone who's angry is subject to judgment. And he says, if you look at a woman lustfully, you commit adultery. If anyone wants to sue or sue somebody, you're not being fair and honest. And he goes, we will all be given account for our words. And he said, watch out for greed. He said, Jesus said these same things. He goes, how do you live the better life? How do you live this life? How do you know how to live? Well, God told us all along in his word, hey, here's the best way. Here's going to be my standard. And when they began to question Jesus, he said, here's the best thing for you to do. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. You see, God had told them back in Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, told them the same things. And so Jesus, new, hip Jesus, up in the groove of the New Testament and great things, told him the same things. Here's how to live the best life. Here's the standard. Here's how you can know if you're getting off. The technical term that I use is out of whack. How do you know when something's out of whack? Well, I told you when my clocks are all off, I'm like, oh, something's out of whack. We got to fix it. When your car begins to shimmy, and you're like, oh, something's out of whack. We can figure out those things. When something happens in our body and it's not going right, oh, something's out of whack. I need to fix something that's in here. When our heart begins to be like this place, when our heart begins to feel something, when something begins to happen, we can tell we're out of whack. And what do? We can look to the standard. We can say, oh, where am I living this life that God intended me to? Am I living the best? Have I lost sight? Am I crooked? Am I in there or not in there somewhere? And that's what God calls us to do, is to be the best that we can be so that we can be all that God wants us to. We can read these stories in the Bible. The Bible is so full of stories. Look at Amos. plumb line today. Look how great that is. The Bible is full of these stories of people who have listened to God and lived their best and messed up along the way and blew it and said, oh. And the Bible shows us again and again how God wants the best for them. How God says, okay, hey, let's get back. Let's go back to the standard. Let's figure this out. Let's make it happen. I have been talking to Pastor Brad, who will be here in 2 more weeks, 3 weeks. Anyway, he'll be here really soon. And we were talking to him about sermons and stuff. And I told him, I said, hey, listen, I'm really going to need you to get here because I'm really tired of learning life lessons when I preach. It's getting to be too hard for me. I'm like, blah. And so I got to tell you, when I began talking about this plumb line, when I began talking about the standard, when I began talking about, oh, Israel was crooked. They had lost sight. They were not plumb anymore. And God said, hey, I need to set this out. And so I need to tell you, for a few weeks now, I have been struggling. I have been trying to figure out life, and it's not going well for me. And I kind of knew it, but you kind of don't know it. You know those things when you begin to feel like, oh, things aren't really going well, and I begin to tighten up within my heart and with my soul. And I was just continuing to do the things that I normally do and every day. And people would say, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, yes, of course I'm okay, fine. And I begin to get more sharp in my tones. Not to you guys. I love you guys. I'm always kind to you. But those people I work with and the one I live with, I could get real sharp with them. And so these things kept coming up, and it just kept going, and I figured I had to hold tighter and control. And so I was doing more of these things and stepping into that. And you can tell, you know, when something, but I just kept going because I'm like, nope, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I would get sharper, and I would get angrier, and I would get like frustrated quicker, and I would be like, oh, I wouldn't step into what I knew maybe was wrong, or I have this inner dialogue. You probably do too, but my inner dialogue is like, you go, girl, we got this. And so when I'm like, I need to be this way, she's like, yeah, you do. Let's keep going. I'm like, that's who I listen to. I don't listen to the things around me who people are saying, hey, are you doing okay? Yes. My face, I'm one of these people where my face shows it, and I'm like, this is me happy. Look at this. Look, I'm smiling. Everything's good. And I would continue to go like this, and it just kept progressing. And I thought I was fine. Until one day, a week or so ago, Dusty, our worship leader, comes into my office, and he says, hey, Sheila, how's it going? I'm like, great. This is my happy face. And he's like, is there some tension between us? And I'm like, no. And he's like, are you sure? Because I've had several people come up to me and say that, like, it seems to be really tense between us. And I'm like, no, we're fine. It's so good, right? Well, I feel good. You feel good? Yeah, it's all good. Dusty called me out of my crookedness. Dusty said, hey, something's not right. Something's like, can we talk about this? See, one of our core values for our staff is that you go to the source. And so he came to me and he's like, hey, Sheila, like something's not right. And I'm like, no, it's all good. My inner girl is going, come on, get through this. We can just get home. We'll be fine. We can be grumpy back there. And so I did. I'm like, no, Dusty, it's all good. But then I go home and I begin to pray and I'm like, oh, God, is something wrong with me? Have I done this? And immediately I'm reminded of the verse in Nehemiah that says, the joy of the Lord is my strength. You see, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And I'm like, oh, I'm crooked. I don't have any joy. Oh, God, you're right. I don't have that. I don't have the joy in what I'm doing. I'm just doing things and I'm fussy and I'm grumpy because I've lost the joy of the Lord. God, I need you to restore my joy. I need you to give me back the joy that is you because, God, I've lost it. You see, I'm crooked. I lost my way. Thankfully, Dusty was my prophet who came in and spoke into my life. Dusty was the one who said, hey, something doesn't seem right. He didn't know Maybe he did. Maybe God said, go talk to Sheila because she's off. Maybe he did. Let's give him that credit, okay? Are there people in your life who are saying things to you that you need to listen to? You see, I didn't listen all the way back here when people are like, hey, are you okay? When my very kind and gentle husband says, why is this bothering you so much? And I'm like, and when people began to say different things to me, and I was like, no, until someone spoke directly to me and said, hey, how about this? And I realized I wasn't aligned. I was uncalibrated. I needed to come back to center. I needed to come back to the standard. You see, God created me in this way that I always see the glass half full. I always see the good side of something. I always see the positive in it. That's who he created me to be. And I'd lost that joy. That was my strength. I had lost the joy of the Lord, of how he created me to be. And I thought, no, I got to be this way. This is how I'm supposed to be right now. Whew, I wasn't, and I'm not. And I had to recalibrate. And so maybe there are places in your life that people have been saying things to you and you just keep walking away from them. Maybe God is sending somebody in your life to help you recalibrate. I didn't lose anything. I was doing my devotions every day. I was praying. I was doing all the right things, but I had lost plumb. I was crooked. I was off sides. I needed to get back to plumb. I needed to get back to straight. I needed to get back to who God had created me to be and to be reminded that he loves me so and that he wants good for me. See, the standard that God created is that he loves you. You see, he sent his son early on. He sent his son to remind the people of how much he loved them. They lost sight of that. They'd lost their plumb. And God steps in and says, nope, let's be reminded of that. He wants the best for us. But he also wants us to listen. He wants us to listen to those around us who may be able to speak into our lives. He wants us to listen and have conversation with God because he's still talking. Remember Plumb Bob from the Bible, Barney's Hardware. It's still relevant. God's still talking to us today. God is still wanting to speak to you and speak into your life. You have to be open. You have to listen. You have to be reminded, oh, sometimes I need to calibrate back to where God is and to make sure that I am staying where the standard is set. Today we're going to share in communion together. If you didn't get a cup when you came in, just raise your hand right now and we'll have some people who can come and give you a little cup all the way down front. Give them a second because I made him come all the way over here. Raise your hand if you need a cup. And here's how it's going to go. Let me tell you a little bit about these cups. Are complicated and a little bit tricky. There's this tiny flap on the top that is going to open up in just a minute. And then there's another bigger flap on the bottom that's going to give you the juice. And in just a few minutes, when we sing the song, I'm going to invite you to do that. But I got to tell you why we do it. I got to tell you why we set this up. See this little cup and juice? It's called communion. It's called Eucharist. It's called the body and the blood. And this is what happens is that when Jesus was with his disciples, he was gathered with them and he had told them all along, you see, God sent his son to save the world. God sent his son so that he would know how much, we would know how much he loves us. And he sent them in there and he told his disciples and he taught them all along the way and he told them all of those things and he told them about how much God had loved them and reminded them. And he said, one day you're going to have to do this because I'm going to be gone. I'm not going to be with you. And they're like, what? No, he said, he told them that he would die and that he would rise again on the third day. And they couldn't believe it. I wouldn't have. Like, I'd never seen it before, never seen it since. Happened that one time. But he told them that again and again. And so when he's with them right before crucifixion, here's the critical time that he is going to be, the last words he gets to speak into them. And he takes this bread that they would share. See, they're at a festival, and this is something set up. They were remembering the Passover from a long time ago, and when God called them out of Egypt, and he's pulling everything together. And Jesus takes the bread, and he blesses it, and he breaks it, and he hands it out to all of them. He said, take this. This is my body that will be broken for you. And then he takes the cup of wine, and he holds it up and he blesses it. And he passes it around and he says, take and drink. This is going to be my blood that is shed for you. And he said, when you do this, remember me. And so he said, hey, when you're gathered at the table again, when you're coming together and there's bread and there's wine, I want you to remember me. I want you to remember that my body was broken, my blood was shed so that you could have life. Because God loved you so much that we celebrate that, we commemorate that, and we say, oh God, I'm going to take this and I'm going to share in you. I'm going to invite you to stand. And when this song plays, I'm going to invite you to take the elements, to open them up, to pray before you do, to say, God, do I need to recalibrate? God, show me in my life, do I need to reset to you? Or maybe you need to pray, oh God, I love you so. Let me be reminded of your incredible love for me. Let me be reminded, God, that you have given me everything I needed. But I want you to spend time with God. I want you to listen to the song as played and sung, that we give glory and we celebrate in this element that God loved us so, and he wants the best for us. And he set a standard so that we could step into the best life that God has for us. So as we sing and as we celebrate, share in communion together.